Thanks, Cameron, and sorry you had to end in the middle of a very interesting point there. I'm sure we'll come back to it during questions. We might go on to the next presentation now, and then we can have a sort of panel question and answer session. Next speaker is Professor Chris Chamberlain, who'll be well known to many of you. Chris was Director, Centre for Applied Social Research at RMIT between 2005 and 2013, where he's now Emeritus Professor. Chris is the joint author of Youth Homelessness, Early Intervention and Prevention, Counting the Homeless, 2001 and 2006. And his new book, Homelessness in Australia, An Introduction, will be published by New South Publishing in September. Please join me in welcoming Chris.
Good morning, everybody. I think I'm the fourth speaker in a row. You must be very tired of listening to people. So I have to do my best. I'm going to talk about the... Sorry, I need to also make sure I can manage the technology. Okay. Nope. I can do this, it's easy. I'm going to talk about the Melbourne Street to Home project, and one of the kind of themes for today is new models, and I'm going to say rather a lot about the Melbourne Street to Home project in terms of how it works and what it delivers and what are the challenges. And I actually might begin by just simply giving you the overall point of the talk. And then I'll kind of go back and unpack it. The overall point is this, that Melbourne Street to Home takes in very, very disadvantaged people, chronic rough sleepers, most of whom have been homeless, been rough sleeping for 3 years or longer. And we've followed them over 2 years, and after a year, 78% of them were housed, and now after 2 years, we've just finished those interviews, 70% are still housed. So that's the broad point. It's a very difficult population, and a substantial number of them now appear to be in secure housing, and at a 2 year point they're maintaining that. I'm going to unpack the argument by focusing on 5 points. I'll just briefly sketch kind of the approach of Melbourne Street to Home. Then I do want to tell you a little bit about who came into it, so you can get a sense of the history and the background of the people who've taken part. Then I'll show you the data on their housing situation, in other words, where they were when they started in the programme and where they are now. Then my 4th point, I'm going to look at their health and well-being. In the Melbourne Street to Home, one of the particular goals is to try and improve people's health. So that was one of the sort of criteria when it was set up, and I'll show you some data on their health, and if I've got time, I'll show you a little bit of data about their drug and alcohol use. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the kind of broad area of social inclusion and show you various indicators of kind of to what extent they've rebuilt a sense of community and links with other people in the community and so on. So let me just talk briefly about the kind of approach of the Melbourne Street to Home project. Essentially, it's trying to target the most vulnerable rough sleepers, and people are recruited into the program in what's called registry week, where people go out into the community for 5 days in the week between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. in the morning, trying to find the rough sleepers, and they administer this survey to kind of get a sense of what's actually happening in their lives. And then the program tries to follow up those who are, as it were, most at risk. And I think it was Cameron who referred to this, who said that the people who come in are typically thought to be at risk of actually early death because they've got sufficiently serious problems, and so forth. So the aim is to kind of get the most disadvantaged group. The approach uses assertive outreach, which literally means they go out and find them, and then once it's decided who's going to be in the program, they then typically have to go back on the streets to kind of encourage them to join and so on. The aim is a housing first program, so the aim is to give them housing first of all. And one of the important things in the Melbourne Street to Home is the housing is not all together. It's actually dispersed across the community. This is actually a very important policy issue. When you're rehousing people who are chronically homeless, do you, as it were, put them into kind of one building, or do you disperse them? Melbourne Street to Home, they are dispersed. They're not using a particular place. And then the final characteristic of the program is they get intensive support for 12 months. They get intensive support for 12 months after they've been housed. So if it takes 6 months or 9 months to house them, and often it does, because as lots of people refer to, the problem is, you know, where is the housing for these people? But they support them while they're trying to get them housed, and then they get 12 months support beyond that point in time. I'm going to look at the data in two ways. Initially, I'm just going to look at the people who came into the program in the first year and the second year, and then I'm going to kind of look at it in a different way. I'm going to look at everybody who, at the point they've been in the program after a year and then after 2 years. Did I say that clearly? Some people came in year 1, some people came in year 2, and I'll look at that first. Then I'm going to take everybody and say, where were they after 12 months, regardless of when they came in, and then where were they after 24 months. Let's see, clients at the baseline interview. We had 71 people in the sample who initially came into the program, and then after 12 months there were 67 left. Two people had died during that time, and then after 24 months we actually had 57 left. Another person had died during that time. So of the initial group of 71, 3 actually died during the program for various reasons. As you can see at the bottom end, or the lower part, after 12 months we managed to get 67 out of the 69 who were still eligible, so we got a good response rate of 97, and then after 24 months we got a response rate of 84%. We do know a bit, so we got 57 of the people after 12 months. We do know about 6 of those we couldn't interview. 3 of them were housed and 3 of them were homeless. But I'm mainly going to look at the 57. Let's look next at who actually came into the program. There's lots of numbers and you don't need to look at all of these. I'm told I can use a button to point to things, but I don't think I can manage that. I've actually put up cohort 1. This is people who came in after 1 year and after 2 years. The main purpose of that was we were looking to see whether they were taking easier clients after a year. In fact, they're not. And I'll focus simply on the overall picture. You can see, first of all, that 89% of the people who came into the program were men. Now, this is actually quite an important issue, and you might want to ask questions about this later. Street to Home caters very much for chronically homeless men, because it's men who are the rough sleepers. There are chronically homeless women, but they tend not to be long-term rough sleepers. They have other options. So the decision to focus on rough sleeping made by the government, the Commonwealth and the state government, was essentially a decision to focus largely on males in the population rather than females. As you can see from the right-hand column, most of them were single, and this is a sample of older people. The mean age, or the average age for people in the sample, was 46. And if you come a bit further down, sorry people on that side won't see, but if you come a bit further down, you can see 41% of them had left before year 10. In other words, they hadn't completed the minimum schooling. And if you go a bit further down that right-hand column, you can see 69% were on disability support pensions. If I can, sorry, I will try and use this button. Okay. If you look along that line, you can see that half the people in the study had their first experience when they were of homelessness when they were 18 or younger. And I think Cameron gave a similar figure for the Brisbane and Sydney samples. No difference between the first cohort coming in and the second cohort. Average number of years since they were first homeless was around about the 20-year mark. I've already told you the average age was 46. So many of them have been in the population a long time. And since the last time they had a home, as in a conventional home, the average was about 9 years. So you're basically dealing with a population of chronic rough sleepers. Now, when we say people are chronic rough sleepers, that doesn't mean literally every night, every month, every week of the year. It means they're sleeping rough on a long-term basis, but often when people get a welfare benefit of some description, they may have a few nights in a boarding house, they may go to a service. But typically they've been sleeping rough on and off for long periods of time. And again, if I can use this device, we didn't have anybody in the sample who'd been sleeping rough for less than 6 months. We had a tiny group who'd been sleeping rough for 6 to 11 months. 82% of them, as you can see, have been sleeping rough for 3 years or longer. And if you look at 5 years or longer, it's actually, I think it's 68% or 66%. And then a third of them have been sleeping rough for 10 years or longer. These were chronically homeless people with very, very long histories of rough sleeping. And not surprisingly, their health was very bad. I said to you earlier that one of the priorities in the Melbourne Street to Home was to actually try and improve people's health. And one of the things that the programme has is it has a nurse working in the team. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Again, if you just look at the figures, I'm getting quite proud of the fact that I can do this. You don't realise what a challenge it is. Nearly everybody, 86%, reported a chronic health condition, and these are bad things. These are things like diabetes, heart conditions, all kinds of things. 51%, half of them had 3 or more chronic health conditions. 3/4 of them had been treated for a mental disorder at some point in their life. 72% of them had used IV drugs, i.e. injected drugs, and so the list goes on. And 70% at the bottom were currently taking prescribed medication. In other words, this was a group where their health issues were really bad on a whole range of scores. I've only got 5 minutes left. Yeah. Oh dear.
Well, you can talk for longer, but there are fewer questions.
Okay. Can I go as fast as Cameron? Oh, I can, you know. Don't you worry. Yeah. Okay. When we talk about referral, everybody who came in when they did the vulnerability index was obviously homeless and rough sleeping. It took quite a while to get the first round of interviews done, and by the time we did the first round of interviews, 1/4 of them had already been rehoused by Street to Home. But lots of people, it took ages to get them rehoused because the problem was finding housing for them. It's one of the weaknesses of the model that housing wasn't actually connected into the model. But after a year, shit. You don't think I can do this, do you? After a year, 78% were actually rehoused. And 24 months, after 24 months, which is the recent interviews, 70% are still in housing. Most of those have been in housing for over a year now. It's not 100% success, but given the characteristics of the group, it's fairly significant. Now, there are lots of things that I need to tell you, and I'll just do this fairly loosely. One of the most important things, when people move into housing, it's actually really difficult for them. When you've been on the streets and your community is on the streets, when you first move into housing, one of the things is you're actually normally lonely. I mean, most of the people in the sample were single. You may be in a high-rise block. It might be a reasonable apartment in the sense of kitchen, bathroom, lounge room, dining room, etc. But what do you do all day? You've got no mates around. Lots of people are not used to running a household. I showed you earlier that half of them became homeless before they were 18. Right? It was very frightening for many people. And one of the major things that Street to Home was doing was all kinds of practical things to try and support people. And I've just put up a couple of quotes. One is from Brendan. who says that moving into his new place was a challenge. It's a big step from homelessness into a home, especially when you've been in a chronic homeless situation. So it's a big leap, and it's not one that's easily managed without support. Fortunately, I've had that support from Street to Home. Or Anthony says he's managing okay. First it was scary because I didn't know anyone and I was very lonely. It didn't feel like home at first, that's all. But once you start getting all material stuff, it starts feeling like a home, etc. One of the things that Street to Home particularly did was help people with practical things. It was a very good way of building relationships. And they also, I'm going to just tell me when I've got to stop. Okay, I'll use some qualitative data. It's more interesting than numbers. One of the things for many of them was they had all kinds of health issues. Actually, I will show you one thing I got back. We asked them, how was their health after they'd been in the program 12 months? Can you see that 61% said their health was better? 21% said it was worse. That's explainable. Many of them had chronic health conditions. Many of these people were sick. But 61% felt better and 18% said it's the same. One of the things that Street to Home did was all kinds of practical things. Like, for example, lots of people hadn't been to a dentist for years. They'd been living on the streets. They had all kinds of, problems to do with their teeth. Other people didn't have spectacles. Other people didn't know how to get themselves organised for medical appointments. Street to Home did lots of practical things, like getting people to the doctor, saying, yes, we can find a dentist for you. You're nervous, I'll come along with you. Shall I pick you up in the morning and we'll take you down? Don't forget your appointments tomorrow, and so on. And again, I've just used a few quotes just to give you a sense of how important this was to people. So I won't read them all, but Rick says, when you're doing it rough, you don't want to go to the doctor to find out there's something wrong. Now that I'm stable, I've been going to the doctors and found out things are wrong. It's a bit hard, but it's good to know. The lad at the bottom, Adrian, said, I feel a lot better because I'm eating consistently and I notice the difference straight away. The person in the middle said he's now sticking to his medication, now he's in proper accommodation. So one of the things about building relationships was actually providing lots and lots of practical help. And it was quite clear after a year that many of the people, they're not going to be healthy and, as it were, they're never going to get back to normal health, but they were feeling significantly better, and there are a whole set of improvements. I'll zip through some of these, if I can do it. Again, I'll show you some qualitative quotes. This is what Jacques said at the second interview. The housing has definitely helped. Without housing, I don't know where I'd be. I don't know if I'd be alive. Penny said, I feel complete now that I've got a place. I know it's my home, and it gives me stability and self-confidence. One of the things a lot of people also said was, now I can have my kids. Many of them had children, but they had simply lost all contact with their children. And one of the really important things about having a house was they wanted to build their relationships. And I don't know if I can find it. This is about alcohol. As you can see in this particular one, a lot of people were now feeling more accepted by their family. There'd been some improvement in that over the 2 years. But I'm rather touched by the quote by Brendan, and this is fairly typical of what many of them said. Brendan said, being homeless has done a lot of damage. I've always had my children around me. To suddenly have them ordered from you makes you angry. Now my parental role is restored. My son is at my house now. This was a very important theme. So I must be out of time. 1 minute, right. Let me try and conclude overall. Street to Home in Melbourne is working with a very, very difficult population, people who are really disadvantaged. The idea of living in a house is long lost for many of them. But it does seem to have been successful in many cases. As I said, after a year, 78% of them were housed. The biggest problem was finding the housing for them. Lots of them were in the program for 9 or 10 months before they got housed. Although what the workers did were things like they had a plan, they kept talking to them about what they were trying to do and so on. Some people have tipped over since, but after 2 years, 70% of the people are still housed. It's actually quite nice to give a good news story, and it is a good news story. They had some terrific workers in this program, And you can work with people who are very disadvantaged. You can help them rebuild their lives. It takes time. Most of them are not back in the labour force, but they are in secure housing. They are slowly rebuilding relationships with friends and family and rebuilding their lives in the community. I've talked much too much, so I will stop. Thank you.